Hi friends, it's Unicorn. Today is a book recommendation for Women's History Month and beyond. March is the Women's History Month, and every year I share some books that I recommend for that month on my WeChat with my friends in China, and I also talk about those books here. However, as you can tell, it's already April, but it's better late than never, and we of course can always read good books all year round. So today I'm gonna recommend 9 books here. Some of them I have read, some I actually have not, but I am very interested in them and they are my top priorities. Books includes different genres for us to read beyond the Women's History Month. Some of them has been discussed quite a lot here on BookTube already, but some of them are relatively new or the book that I think that deserve more spotlights, including fictions and nonfiction. So without further ado, let's talk about the books in the order of nonfiction, memoirs, and fictions. For nonfiction section, I have more books that I am interested to read than the books that I have read, but I feel like they all sound amazing. However, I did read and loved the first book here, and it is Eve by Kat Bohannon, which is a book that I have just finished not long ago, and I loved it. I read this book because it was nominated on the long list of the Women's Nonfiction Prize, the brand new Nonfiction Prize this year, and I loved it so much, and I was so surprised that it didn't make to the shortlist actually. And because it's the only books that I read on the long list so far, so I now have much more higher standards to the books that did make into the shortlist. Anyhow, this book is a nonfiction on the evolution of women's bodies throughout the history of life. Not human beings' lives, but all lives back to 200 million years ago and more. Each chapter focuses on one organ of modern women's body, talking about the function of the parts, how they evolved over time, and what functionalities our body picked up along the way and also abandoned when we are evolving that makes us a continuous and evolving species. The studies and the science facts in this book is so interesting. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know about women's bodies, about my bodies and females' bodies in variety of animals historically. And also I love the writing. The languages of the book was just so humorous. My partner and I, we listened to this audiobook together while we were on a road trip and we laughed out loud so many times, and we both enjoyed this book so much. And I also loved how inclusive this book is. It explores women's bodies scientifically across different spectrums, including trans women, and I feel like it equipped me with more knowledge and evidence around it, and just overall I learned so much from this book and I loved it so much. Highly recommend. The next book is Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation by Sylvia Federici. This book was on the top books of the Chinese reading community last year in the translated section. The theme of this book is actually echoing with Eve. It's talking about women's body and the interpretation of them throughout history, especially in the transition to capitalism throughout human history. The book shows the battle against the rebel body and the conflict between body and mind. By discussing the development of labor power and self-ownership, the book explores the principles of modern social organizations and channeling the traditional narratives in history. Continue with this trend of discussion about body. Another book that was kind of related to this is Masis by Lucy Jones. This is another book that was longlisted on the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. It's a book about the transition into motherhood and how it affected the body and the mind and the brain. Initially, I wasn't very keen on reading it. As a child-free person who also has complex relationship with my own mother, I feel like I often disconnected with the topic of being a mother, but my interest greatly increased after reading Eve, and I'm really interested to learn more about the changes that our body makes in different situations. I'm also intrigued by the blurb of the book saying that the book talks about the interdependence and the individual identity about motherhood and femininity. This is one of the books that I haven't read, but I would love to get to in the near future. Then I have 2 books that I am not sure if they have English translation yet, but let's talk about them nonetheless. The first one is Rage Against Machismo This is a French title. It's written by Mathilde Larrère. This is an illustrated book written in French and has at least the Chinese translation, so that's how I discovered it. This book reveals the history and the progress of feminism in France for the past 200 years, from the tiniest right like the right to wear pants in public for the first time, or other bigger issues like the right to vote and the right for education. When talking about feminism, we always talk about the different waves that we had throughout history, but it's the accumulations of actions that push time forward, and I think this book is a very good reminder of that. The last book here is one that I am currently reading. It is a Japanese book called Nekoto, written by Tsukiyama Haru, and it has a Chinese translation version called 育儿放弃. The title means child abandonment or child neglect, or like giving up on raising the child. This is an investigative nonfiction focusing on a case happened in Japan in the 2000s where a 3-year-old young girl died in a box after she was put into the box for about 20 days. She died from hunger and had a little brother who is 1.5 years old when she died, and her mom was pregnant with another baby at the time. This case shook the Japanese society and wakened people up for the phenomenon called childcare abandonment. It makes a lot of people, especially the author of course, realize that the death of this little girl is not an individual tragedy caused by this pair of neglectful parents, but in fact it's a lack of support for a young couple and lack of resources that put many parents into similar difficult situations, especially the moms who bears the most enormous pressure and the expectations from society when raising children, but has the least amount of support. This book started from this case and uncovered the difficulties and the helplessness that some young parents are facing in Japan, especially for young mothers, and also asks the question that why the mother is always the one to blame. Now let's move on to memoirs. I have 2 memoirs in this year's recommendation, both because they were newly translated into Chinese last year, and I am happy that because of the translation, they reached to a wider audience. The first memoir is Crying in Hmart by Michelle Zauner. This book is already very beloved in the booktube community when it was published, and I have read it when it came out at the time, and I liked it quite a lot. Michelle Zauner is a Korean American who grew up as one of the few Asian American kids in her community, and she felt like disconnected from her Asian side of the culture growing up. But when her mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she had a reckoning with her identity, which brought her to reclaim the gift of tastes, languages, and history that her mom has given back. This book is very moving, candidly wrote the emotions and relationship Michelle Zauner has with his mom and her culture. I love that it doesn't shy away from the complexities, including the jealousy that Michelle had towards some of her mom's close friends because they are more close to her mom's culture than her. Having both Crying and Hmart on the title, this is certainly a book that will make you cry and also makes you really hungry. I highly recommend you to check it out if you haven't. Then there's Consent by Vanessa Springora. This book was translated into English by Natasha Larrea. This is a painful book to read. One that I actually had to put down and still waiting for the right moment for me and enough courage to continue to pick it up. Same with Crying in Hmart. It was translated into Chinese last year and was very well loved. This is Vanessa's memoir talking about her experiences when she was 13 and was manipulated by a very notable and 50 years old established writer in France, and how this disturbing relationships changed her and affected her as she grew older. Honestly, I had to stop even before I got to that part because the memory of her childhood alone is painful enough and really hard to read. However, I am planning to continue reading it this year because I think it's a very important book for us all, but please be prepared if you also want to pick it up. Next, I have 2 novels that I loved from last year, dealing with women's lives from different aspects. The first one is Alena Notes by Claudia Pinheiro and translated by Francis Riddle. This is a story set in Argentina. Alena is an elderly woman who is suffering from Parkinson's disease. One day, her daughter died on the bell tower of the local church, and the police quickly concluded that this is a suicide case and closed the investigation. But Alena knows that it was not the case, and she set out to start her own investigation as well. And along the way, she needs to manage her Parkinson's disease. We follow Alena's memories, uncover the stories between her daughter and her, as well as other people, discussing the mother and daughter relationship, but also the role of caregivers and the pressure that they are facing. On top of that, we also learn the events that happened years ago and see the truth behind motherhood. What I loved the most about this book is how compact and rich it is in such a small book. It is a very short book, but everything was explored thoroughly. Although we mainly follow Alena, this one character, but there are multiple well-written women in the book that represented different stages of life and also variety of pursuits that they have in life, which is very fascinating to read. The last book is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garnes. This is a historical fiction set in the 1960s in America, focusing on the life of a woman scientist called Elizabeth Dott. She's a brilliant chemist who is very good at her study. However, women in science are facing enormous discrimination at the time, and she was constantly looking down by her colleagues and others. By a peculiar chance, she started to host a TV show called Supper at 6, in which she approached cooking in a very scientific way. By the cover, we can tell that this book was promoted as a rom-com in the States, but I personally find the writing very touching and exquisite, and I don't think it has excessive amount of romance in the book or the vibes. Instead, I see Elizabeth Dott as a strong, independent, and clear-minded woman who I admire. And I won't say the pressure that she was facing back then went away in today's world, which gives this book a hair of heaviness that I enjoyed a lot as well. And that's all the books that I recommend to my friends in real life, and also you guys here on BookTube this year for the Women's History Month and beyond. Again, sorry that this video comes late, but it's also important for us to remember and celebrate women's history, women in general, all year round, and contribute to write new histories by our tiny actions like reading. Please let me know if you have any thoughts about the book that I mentioned. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to thumb up if you liked the video, and also say hi in the comment section down below. I wish you happy reading, stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you in my next bookish video. Take care.